to become economically independent. So this movement was very powerful at that time. And the policymakers if you wanted to be elected for a man at that time, it was not possible not to speak about the development of childcare policy. Because it was very important. So they were they took into consideration, the women's movement was more powerful maybe than now. And it was very, very important because the women's movement claimed economic independence from women. And at the same time, interestingly enough, they got the support, not direct support, but they went in the same direction of the pro-natalist lobby. Because the pro-natalist lobby at that time eventually understood that if they wanted the women to have more children, the government needed to develop the childcare policy. And they were aware that it was not by encouraging women to stop, not to work, not to be in paid work, that they would have more children. And I think it's quite something France stands out in this field, because the pro-natalists were not against the fact that women were working. They were concerned about the fertility decline. They were concerned about encouraging families to have more. That was the main point. So when they understood that it was not because they encouraged women to stay home that they would have, on the contrary. So in a certain way there were some convergence. Mm-hmm. And of course then, you know, there was a turning point of and meaning a paradigmatic shift in family policy. So you had a huge and very important development of publicly subsidized childcare arrangements especially for preschool children, because already at that time you had full-time attendance for children who were attending school after 6. But the most important emphasis was put on children under 6 years of age. And you already know that, because so I don't need to spend, just to illustrate what I am saying. Crèche, the childcare centers, and nursery school, which is under the Ministry of Education, but you have nursery school for children in France on a full-time basis, if the parents want, as soon as the child reaches the age of 2. So if the parent cannot find a place in the crèche, they can always go to the nursery school and ask for a place. And so over the 30 years period, time span, you had a percentage of children aged less than 3 in childcare provision increased from 18% to 23%, and now it's even more. It is about almost 30% of them who are either in public in crèche or in nursery schools. You have percentage of children aged 3 attending nursery school is now almost 100% on a full-time basis, and are provided with lunch at school, which means that the mothers and fathers, of course, but the mothers can work full-time and have their child looked after in nursery schools or in a crèche. And also another example, you know, we have in France a large network of registered childminders, registered, licensed childminders, who look after the children in their own home. Okay, they work, they are living in their home, and they look after the children from parents, and they are declared. They are strictly, it is a very strong institution in France. Mm-hmm. And the number of these registered childminders increased from 130,000 in 1990 to almost 300,000 in 2009, which was a huge increase. And it is now the main childcare arrangements for children under 3 because there is a shortage of places in crèche. Because in France, also for historical reasons, most of the parents, whatever their social background, prefer to have their child looked after in a crèche than by a childminder. So most of the time they try first to get a place, and if they don't, they go to a childminder. Also, another example, public expenditure on childcare centers in France, I mean only crèche, increased dramatically between 5 years, between 2000 to 2005. Because of course, the policymakers at any level, at the local level, at the government level, each time there is elections, it is very high on the political agenda. Parents or family associations put pressure to increase the childcare policy, to enhance the childcare policy and to create new places. Other significant changes, the extension of the paternity leave, paid at full rate, the financial incentives also to encourage companies to set up their own crèche, and running costs are very highly, and even partly, but very highly covered by local family allowance fund. I mean by the social security scheme, which is very costly, but which encourage the companies to create their own crèche, if they respect the national legislation in regard to the staff, the qualified staff, and the fees, etc. But otherwise, they are provided with large subsidies. As I said, childcare policy for children aged between 3 and 6. They attend the nursery school, which is free, full-time, lunch available, after-school programs, income-related fees for lunch, and childcare allowances provided for after-school activities. And it's almost always, except for the lunch, it is universal. And France is well known. I will not insist on that because it's well known, but of course when you compare spending on childcare services to other countries, and especially, except Sweden of course, except the Nordic countries, but if you compare France with Germany or UK, you see that spending per child, for children under 3, is much more important in France than in the other countries, except, of course, the Nordic countries. And France is very, very well known for that. So I don't... Another aspect I wanted to just mention, which is very interesting. When you look, France is doing quite well as far as the employment rate of mothers with young children are concerned. But when you compare France, Germany, UK, Portugal, and Netherlands, it's very interesting to see that Portugal is doing the best. France, the employment rate of mothers is not only very high, but the share of these working mothers working part-time is much smaller than compared to the other countries, and especially even France. So Portugal is a very interesting country, I must say, except that you don't have the same fertility level, but still, we have a lot to learn from your country, I think. Now, I would like, maybe because we did not really have the time to consider these aspects, there are other factors also explaining high fertility rates in France. And I think too often researchers or academics turn a blind eye or don't consider this aspect, I think it's an important one. In France, you have a large share of employed women who are working in the public sector. But when I say the public sector, it's not the same one as in the Nordic countries or in Sweden, for example. When, first, the data, 25% of the working mothers in France are working in the public sector. And what does it mean in France to work in the public sector? It's stability for you all your life. You cannot be made redundant. You cannot be fired. You are more or less more paid than in the private sector. And more importantly, you are provided with very, very family-friendly schemes. So it's very much easier, let's say, much easier than in the private sector to combine a full-time job with family obligations. And it results in one phenomena. When you compare the fertility rate in the public sector for women working in the public sector to the other women, you observe that women working in the public sector in France have much more children than in the rest of the economy and the rest of the economic world. And of course there are two explanations there. I think it's not contradictory, but still. One explanation, and I think it's an adequate, relevant explanation. The women anticipate, in France, the women anticipate. And when they go to the university, they get educated more and more like everywhere else. That's not, of course, something original, but they anticipate. And most of them, they will choose, if they can, to enter the public sector. Because they know that they will be provided with much more flexible and family-friendly arrangements than in the private sector. Even career-oriented women do that. One aspect. The other aspect is women work in the public sector, they have no children, maybe they don't even have anticipated these aspects, but as they live in a family-friendly environment, quite generous, I must say, very generous, they decide not to give up the idea to have two or more or three children. Because, you know, there are two distinctive features in fertility rates in France. I just want to recall that. First, the share of families who have 3 children or more is much more important than in most of the other European countries, much more. Second aspect, which is also very important, France stands out as the country where the share of women who remain childless is much smaller than in other European countries. It's around between 10 and 14%. When you compare with Germany, because I always make very often comparison with Germany, France and Germany. When you compare with Germany it's 30%. And among women with academic background, in Germany it's 40%. In France it's around 12%. So it makes a difference. Other factor which is also very important, but of course it goes hand in hand with all the other factors I have developed. Because there is an interactive process which has always taken place. The value system and the child rearing norms. And here the historical foundations are very important to take into account. As it is a very long tradition for women to have their child looked after on full-time basis It's absolutely